την δόκτωρα Helen Dixon, η οποία θα μας παρουσιάσει το θέμα σε μετάφραση. Ένας Βυζαντινός ταξιδευτής στη Ρώμη επιστρέφει στην Ανατολή. Ο ανώνυμος γραφέας του εγγράφου Μονή Βατοπεδινού. Dr. Dixon, the stage is yours.
Thank you to Mount Athos Center for accepting my paper. And obviously I'm English, so I'm going to speak in English, but I'll try to speak, slowly and clearly. And you have to forgive me for my bad cold, which has got my throat. It's not good. So hopefully there will be no problems of diction. So the focus of my paper today is actually I'm just going to take my watch off so I can keep an eye on the time. Okay, the focus of my paper today is a Greek scribe known by the name Halfinger Anonymous 31, which the German paleographer Dieter Halfinger gave him in 1977, and I shall henceforth refer to him as A31. A31 seems to have traveled, I think he traveled from Mistra, definitely from the Morea, to Rome in around 1461, more or less at the same time as Thomas Palaiologos, the despot, and to have returned east to the court of Demetrius Palaiologos, despot, also in Thrace, in time to copy a horismos bearing the date July 1462. And this is the hypothesis of an Italian scholar, David Speranzi, in his recent book, Omero I Cardinali gli Esuli, published in 2016, revising the itinerary postulated by Rudolf Steffek in 2012. But we don't know who this person is or why he made this journey. Now, Steffek had identified A31 as the scribe who copied 6 manuscripts. The decree the Greek. Unfortunately, we had problems with my Greek font, so that should say Monī Vatopaidou, and the plate is taken from a 1930 journal, which I had to erase the title of because it didn't come out. So this scribe copied Demetrius Palaiologos' decree in 1462, in which he transferred jurisdiction over some tenants on the island of Lemnos to the monastery of Vatopaidiou. He also copied Gemistos Platon's De Virtutibus in a manuscript in Milan, which is actually Halfinger's attribution in 1977, and the same work by Plato, in Naples, in a manuscript in Naples, which is also Halfinger's attribution in 1977. Xenophon's Anabasis in a manuscript in the Vatican Library, Thucydides in another manuscript in the Vatican Library. Thank you very much. That's excellent. I think I'm going to need this. So a Thucydides manuscript also in the Vatican Library, which was co-written with a scribe called Johannes Moskos in 1468. This is actually dated, this manuscript, and probably at Koroni, a manuscript of Arian's Anabasis, together with more works by Gemistos Plato, his monody for Elena Paleologina, and De Processione Sancti Spiritus in a manuscript in Salamanca. Now, on these grounds, Steffek had suggested that A31 came from the Peloponnese and might have entered the service of Demetrius Palaiologos and moved with him to the court of the Sultan after the annexation, the conquest of the Morea in 1460. But the Italian Speranzi, his recent enlargement of the A31 manuscript group with the addition of another manuscript of Gemistos Plato's De Fato and De Virtutibus. These are extracts from Plato's Laws. In another manuscript in Milan, a manuscript in Florence containing Caritonimus Hermonimus Decem Capita, which is a very interesting text, as well as his work on a bilingual text of Homer in a manuscript in Stuttgart, and the restoration of a 14th century manuscript of Libanius Declamationes and Epistolae in Florence. So this provides, in my opinion, fairly good evidence that A31 worked together with other Greek emigres in Rome for what was, I think, a very short period of time in the early 1460s, soon after the arrival of Thomas Palaiologos, who had been welcomed at the court of Pope Pius II. Now, in the face of such disjointed and inconcrete evidence, Speranzi's conclusions were understandably cautious. Some of A31's work is clearly produced in the Morea, in the Peloponnese. Some is clearly produced in Rome. And then we have Steffek's identification of A31's hand in the Vatopaidiou Horismos, which is a sign of the scribe returning east, possibly in 1462, which Speranzi calls una svolta improvvisa e apparentemente inspiegabile. So that means an unexpected and apparently inexplicable about turn. His caution is probably due to the fact that we rely, unfortunately, solely on scribal attributions. We do not know who this person was. He does not sign his name, A31. No name has been attributed to him except for this A31 name. Consequently, we have no historical hooks for him, and hence the question mark in my title, A Byzantine Traveller to Rome Returns East. We don't know for sure. So let's see, however, if we can strengthen this Speranzi's hypothesis by addressing questions of what A31 did and what his connections were with Mistra, with Plato, and Thomas and Demetrius Palaiologos, and what reasons could he have to go to Italy? Why do we then find him back east? And to do this, we must look at the evidence in its immediate historical context. So what led my research to A31? I must explain how this happened, because this actually provides some useful background for our A31 investigation. I like to think is the A31 detective story. My main project is actually not on Greek manuscripts at all. It's on an Italian humanist scholar, Pomponio Leto, of the 15th century, his Roman Academy, and the reception of antiquity in 15th century Rome. And as their name suggests, the Roman Academy prioritized the study of ancient Rome, and like many Italian humanists of their generation, they did not read Greek. However, my work has revealed that two of these Roman scholars collaborated with a Greek emigre at Rome named Johannes Sophianos on a manuscript of Latin translations of Greek texts for Cardinal Bessarion, who is here depicted in actually a fairly contemporary portrait. It's made around 1476 by two artists. This is currently in the Paris Musée du Louvre. So they collaborated, yes, on this manuscript for Cardinal Bessarion in Rome at the same time that our Byzantine traveller was there. And I identified the Latin scribe some years ago, and I suspected that the Greek scribe was, in fact, the translator. It's not. When it's blown up, you can't see very clearly, but it's quite clear in the image on my computer. I suspected that the Greek scribe was in fact the translator, and David Speranzi's work has confirmed this. So the identification of the Greek scribe, it's actually one Greek scribe, not Greek scribes, is by David Speranzi, and I did the identification of the Latin scribes. So pinning a date on this undated manuscript was difficult. I knew as soon as I saw the Latin hands, which I immediately recognized, that the time frame was 1458 to 1468, but I needed a much more precise date. And the scholarship, existing scholarship, did not help very much. The best indicators of date of production come from Bessarian's signature in the upper margin, where he signs himself as cardinal, and Sophianus' address to cardinal. So he says, Sophianus writes to his most glorious and holy lord, Cardinal Bessarion, in his letter in Greek, which suggests the date before May 1463, when Bessarion became Patriarch of Constantinople. In addition, the reference to war against the barbarians suggests a time between 1459 and 1463. I was not able to include the Greek text. Actually, I did include the Greek text, but I had to take it out again. And so Sophianus refers to tu pros tus barbarus polemu, so the war against the barbarians. Concerning harmony amongst men and war against the barbarians, there are currently, I think, many wise and illustrious men about to start an undertaking that is very noble and appropriate to the present times, and these men will themselves clearly follow a good policy and will quite easily persuade their listeners to do what is right. So here, in my opinion, he's clearly referring to, he has to be referring to Bessarion's and Pope Pius II's attempts to make other Italian and European powers commit to a crusade against the Turks, which they found it very difficult to do. At the Council of Mantua in 1459, or in 1460, when Bessarion attended German diets in Nuremberg and Vienna, where he found it very difficult to persuade his listeners, or 1461, when he returned to Rome exhausted by his failure to enlist for the crusade. So I think this manuscript was written between 1458 and Bessarion's return in late 1459 and Bessarion's return in late 1461. A more securely datable manuscript for Sophianus is one in Venice, because he was one of the scribes hired by Bessarion to copy the first version of his In Calumniatorem Platonis in Rome in the spring of 1459. So this is the earliest dated evidence for this scribe, Sophianus' presence in Italy, and places him securely at Rome in the spring of 1459. Now we come to 4 manuscripts involving A31 and Sophianus and their activities in Rome. First of all, we have a Stuttgart manuscript, or manuscript in Stuttgart, which is datable. It's not dated, but it's almost datable. So this contains Homer, the Odyssey, and the Iliad, with Leoncio Pilato's Latin translation as parallel texts. And it's a very deluxe production. There is a lot of decoration. The scribes are 4, including Sophianos, A31, and 2 others. And their work on the Odyssey, they transcribed part of the Odyssey, alternates in a manner that can only be described as random. There is no way then that because they pick up the one from the other, the one writes a few lines, the next one writes a few lines, then Sophianus writes some more lines, and then A31 writes some more lines again. So there's no way the two are not together in the same room. So I give you an example of that. They interrupt each other in their copying. You have the hand of A31, who's the first hand, and then the hand of Sophianus, which is the second hand, in just one example, detail of one leaf. The owner and the person who commissioned it, Jean Geoffroy, Bishop of Arras, who was elected cardinal. These dates are important. Cardinal on the 18th of December in 1461 and was transferred to Albi also as cardinal on the 10th of December in 1462. Using these dates, we can actually date the manuscript. We can say it was begun before December 1461 and finished. So it has to have been begun before December 1461, and it was finished. It has to have been finished around March 1462 because of the decoration. The stemma, so the coat of arms, and the initials, I think you can see EA on the either side of the stemma, the coat of arms on folio 1, indicate that the manuscript's first phase and the second phase, the Latin text and the decoration, were executed before Geoffroy had been elected to the cardinalship, because here he is EA, Episcopos Atrebatensis. He's still bishop, he's not cardinal. So that the work was begun before he had become cardinal on the 18th of December 1461. Sophianus actually addresses a note apologizing for the delayed finishing of the manuscript to Geoffroy, but this time he addresses him as Cardinale Atrebatensi. So this time he's addressing him as cardinal. So by the time the manuscript has been finished, Geoffroy has become a cardinal. So the manuscript has to have been written, in Italian you would say a cavallo di, so straddling this elevation to the cardinalship. So the Greek text was finished after Geoffroy's return to Rome to take up his cardinalship, which means that A31 has to have been in Rome, working very closely with Sophianus on the 10 books of the Odyssey that they copied together, either slightly before December 1461 and finishing around about March 1462, which is almost certainly when Sophianus wrote his note to Geoffroy apologizing for delay in consigning the manuscript. This is the date that Geoffroy came back from France. Why would he write a note apologizing for a delay if this cardinal has not returned yet? I've gone too far. The second manuscript that they wrote together is the one which I find the most interesting, is a 5-part Greek miscellany of rhetorical texts, including Demosthenes, text by Demosthenes, Socrates, obviously speeches, language learning aids, excerpts from the Suda, including verbs for noises that animals make. For example, Sophianus writes Leontos to brukasthai or Pertikos to kakabazdein, to indicate the noises that animals make. This is how you say these noises in Greek. And then finally, there's a philosophical component. You have writings by Gemistos Platon and a collection of Greek nomica. And in my opinion, this was designed to be a teaching tool for either a teacher or a student. It's a sort of Greek reading text collection. And in fact, its first owners were Basilios Chalcondyles and possibly also his father, Demetrius Chalcondyles. So also for this manuscript, Sophianus and A31 had to be together, because in the Demosthenes, they switch their hands again. We must posit in 1461 to 1462, because there's no evidence they were together anywhere else or at any other time. And examination of the watermarks, which is problematic actually, but the watermarks suggest that some A31 texts might have been copied independently in Greece before coming to Rome, whereas the other texts have watermarks suggesting, well, pointing towards early 1460s central Italy. And significantly, the Gnomica, so the collection of excerpts of wise sayings, is the Greek original for Sophiana's Latin translation in my Venice manuscript. So this number 3, this text number 3, has the only Greek exemplar for this translation is in this manuscript in Milan, which was apparently written in Rome during this very short period of time by Sophianus and A31. Another curious feature, sorry, I'm going to have to drink some water. Another curious feature I discovered is that the 3 philosophical texts, I didn't list them all, I'm afraid, in here. It should be Gemistos Platon, De Fato, De Virtutibus, also Pseudo Aristoteles, De Virtutibus as well. So of these 3 philosophical texts, all were also translated by Sophianus into Latin at the same time. And we have extant copies of 2 of them in manuscripts, one in Brussels and one in Rome. So we can conclude that not only do A31 and Sophianus transcribe manuscripts together in Rome, but also that A31 seems to have provided, he really does seem, in my opinion, to have provided at least 4 Greek exemplars, so manuscripts from which Sophianus did his translation work. He was translating these texts into Latin using these specific manuscripts in Greek. And A31 seems, moreover, to have been the first person to have brought, in my opinion, there are very few extant copies of Gemistos Platon's De Fato, actually, in the world. And the earliest datable one to have been circulating in the Italian peninsula seems to be the one written by A31 in this manuscript. So he seems to have brought texts from Greece with him when he came to Rome, and he's responsible for their initial circulation. More manuscripts, they did more, not too much more, a little bit more. They restored the text of Libanius in a manuscript in Florence together. So that's their 3rd collaboration. And the same date applies as for the Milan manuscript and for the Stuttgart manuscript. They had to be together to do this. And then we have a manuscript which I'm afraid this is my work on this is work in progress, because when I went to Milan, somebody else was using it, so I only was able to see it for 5 minutes. And it's a huge multi-part miscellany. So it's a huge, it's about this thick. Right, and it contains a very small fascicule with yet more copies of Platon's De Fato and De Legibus. It's not De Legibus, sorry, that's a mistake. De Virtutibus, again copied by A31. So now he has copied these texts 3 times in manuscripts written in Greek, but probably written in Greek in Italy. And it also contains Aristotle, De Virtutibus. And, no. Now, about the date of this is where I have to go back to Milan and do some more work. Because in another part of the manuscript, this is a multi-part manuscript, another part of the manuscript, written in a contemporary hand to A31, there is the date recorded, Venice, 1st of May, 1462. Now, I have not yet ascertained whether the 1st of May date 1st of May 1462, can be proven to hold true for A31's fascicule. Fascicule means booklet, gathering of pages containing the two Platon works. If it does, then A31 was in Venice on his way back east, possibly at the beginning of May. It fits the date, actually. It's very nice to build an argument constructing of dates that fit, but dates that fit are not always very good indicators that you should construct an argument. At the beginning of May 1462, shortly before Cristoforo Moro was elected Doge at Venice on the 12th of May. And Cristoforo Moro, this is significant, his election, because he is the promoter of the party who wants war against the Turks. No other Venetian wants war against the Turks because they're more interested in preserving trade agreements. But Cristoforo Moro did want war against the Turks. So now we have a timeline, a vague timeline of dates. So, how are we doing for time? I won't dwell on that. Another final manuscript, and then we can draw some conclusions. So, before we do that, I'd just like to remind myself, as much as everybody else, the political divisions of the despotate of the Morea. So, Thomas Palaiologos has mainly the western and northwestern parts, and the Demetrios Palaiologos the mainly southern and southeastern parts, including Mistra. So another manuscript, again attributed to A31, is this copy of Caritonimus Hermonimus Decem Capita in Florence. Thank you. And I had to take the Greek text out because it didn't come. I have it in front of me in my talk, but I had to take it out because the font didn't translate very well. So, but I translated the epilogue into English. So this is the only copy of this version, an enlarged version of the text, and I think possibly written for Thomas Palaiologos to take with him to Italy, because Thomas Palaiologos travels to Rome in 1460, leaving his family in Corfu. So this is after the Turks have definitively, the Ottomans have definitively taken the whole of the Peloponnese, and we have the dispersal. He travels to Rome, leaving his family in Corfu, and he brings the head of St. Andrew to the cranium of St. Andrew to Narni, Italy, in 1461. And before he does so, Caritonimus Hermonimus seems to have redacted a different version of his text Decem Capita, which contains an epilogue, very interesting epilogue, in which the author addresses an unnamed Palaiologos. Palaiologon. This is addressed to an unnamed Palaiologos. You'll have to forgive my English Erasmus pronunciation. I don't know, I'm not able to pronounce ancient Greek with modern Greek accent. So he says, Palaiologon philologotate moi kai philocalestate ale de kai andron axiagastotate kai megalo prepestate. So, is it comprehensible? Yeah? I hope so. Anyway, so it's a very flattering epilogue. And he says, let these things have been said thus far by me, O most learned and finest of the Paleologoi, you who are also the most worthy and most magnificent of men, etc., etc., etc. And may you yourself live out long days with happiness and complete freedom from pain, with total distinction and with a searching, he means the study, sorry, I translated that badly, and keenness for argument and virtue. And now, as you are about to leave for Rome, please always remember me, even if there's nothing in me worth remembering, as I'm aware myself, he says. So, this version does seem to have been written. It's a link that I'm making. I mean, from the circumstantial evidence for Thomas Palaiologos to take with him to Italy, because and this work contains an alignment of Greek and Western Christianity. So, an attempted alignment between Orthodox and Catholic Christianity, interesting in itself, which is distinguished favorably from the religion of Islam. Possibly, I would suggest a text to motivate Western powers to aid Greece, although it's a bit late for this now, against the Turks. So there is the... I had to take a screenshot of the manuscript in the Laurentiana because they don't allow you to download any of their manuscripts from the digital online repository. Now, the detailed A31 timeline. I think I talked for too long already. First of all, in 31st of May, the Turks take Mistra and they annex the Morea. Then, very quickly afterwards, we have Thomas Palaiologos leaving for Corfu and thence to Rome. Demetrius Palaiologos goes eventually to Enos in Thrace, where he's given by the Turkish Sultan the appanage of Imbros Lemnos Thassos Tamothrace Enos, where he then goes to live. And then it's just before Thomas Palaiologos leaves that A31 copies the manuscript with the flattering epilogue for the departing Palaiologos. And then in orange, I have given the activities at Rome with Sophianos. And then, and also my suspected Venice manuscript, De Milan Ambrosia F88 Sup, which may or may not have been written in Venice. Then he's back again in not exactly Greek territory, but in the Greek court, copying a Horismos for Demetrius Palaiologos. And then 1467, Demetrius Palaiologos is stripped of his stipend by the Ottoman Sultan, and immediately afterwards we find A31 in Koroni with Johannes Moskos. So it seems to me that, this is the last slide, after the fall of Mistra and the annexation of the Morea, A31's actions and movements are actually quite well aligned with those of the political dynamics of the fortunes of Thomas and Demetrius Palaiologos. So if we consider that in 1460, Thomas Palaiologos' journey to Rome is acknowledged by A31, he's actually given something to take with him. And shortly afterwards, or even at the same time, A31 travels to Rome himself. The journey to Rome is not acknowledged by A31, it's acknowledged by the writer Charitonymus Hermonymus, but 31 is copying the text. In 1461-2, Thomas Palaiologos is welcomed at the court of Pius II, bearing the cranium of St. Andrew, and at the same time, A31 is at Rome copying manuscripts. In April 1462, Thomas Palaiologos is still in Rome. Bizarian and Pius II, well, he actually stayed in Rome until his death, 3 years later. Bizarian and Pius II installed the cranium of St. Andrew in St. Peter's, and Almost immediately afterwards, A31 has left or is leaving and travels probably via Venice back to the exiled Greek court in the east, which is being maintained by the Ottoman Sultan with a handsome revenue of 7,000 silver coins per annum. And then shortly afterwards, he copies this horismos, transferring jurisdiction over some tenants on Lemnos to the monastery of Vatopaidiou, probably so they would be safe from the Turks. Then, as soon as Demetrius Palaiologos is stripped of his stipend, A31 has to go somewhere else. So I have two alternative hypotheses, and one of them is quite sensible and one of them is quite imaginative. So he's a competent scribe. He's not a scholar. He's a very competent scribe. He works for Bizarian. He copies for Charitonymus Hermonymus, possibly also a civil servant. So either he goes where he thinks patronage is going to be the most generous, first to Rome, to Thomas Palaiologos, the Pope, Bizarian, but after the ceremonies are over, he decides that his fortunes are better to be sought back in the east with Demetrius Palaiologos and his 7,000 silver coins. Or he is a Byzantine agent, i.e. a spy, sent by Demetrius Palaiologos to check up on his brother Thomas's plans for a crusade, which are being machinated in Rome. In any case, he's clearly a follower of Plato from Mistra, and he seems to have been quite instrumental in disseminating the works of Plato in Italy at Rome for the first time. So from a cultural point of view, this anonymous person is very significant, and I only wish we had a name for him. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen. Ζητώ την κατανόηση του ακροατηρίου. Δεν διάκοψα την κυρία Dixon, αν και πέρασε το χρόνο, αλλά η κυρία Dixon μας ήρθε από την Ιρλανδία, όπως αντιλαμβάνεστε, και νομίζω ότι ήταν ευγενές να την αφήσουμε να ολοκληρώσει την παρουσίασή της. Ήταν και συνεχωμένη. Παρακαλώ, αν υπάρχουν... You had a lot of detective work in that research there, following the footprints of A31. Anyway, παρακαλώ, κύριε Χρυσοχοΐδη.
Thank you for this travel you made. But finally, the most interesting for us is that do you have any other trace of the presence of this A31 in the East during this period after May 1462? Because the only we know is he copied this orismos of Demetrius Palaiologos. Do we have any other trace of his presence in the East?
Probably I spoke too fast. I usually do. But we have the dated manuscript Vatican City Palatinus Graicus 133. He's copying this in Koroni.
In Koroni, yes. Is it with Moschos? Yes. Yeah, collaboration.
It's not. I don't know whether you would call that East, but it's. For me, the way to make sense of that is to say that he's probably working. All the time. So Demetrius Palaiologos was living in Enos in Thrace for 7 years.
Yes.
Apart from the horismos, I don't think we have any manuscript which can be located in that time frame, 1460 to 1467. But after Demetrius Palaiologos falls out of favor with the Turkish Sultan, and he loses his revenue, and Demetrius Palaiologos has to go to the monastery. He comes to Vatopaidiou, no? Or he goes, sorry.
No.
He goes to Didimotikos.
what I would like to...
But I think what I think, it's an assumption on my part, is that if you are a scribe, a civil servant, an intellectual person, and you need patronage, so your patron is now penniless, what do? You have to go somewhere else. So I think his choice to go to Koroni is he's going to somewhere in Greece which is not owned by Greeks, it's owned by Venetians, but at least it's not owned by Turks.
Okay, yeah. But after 6 or 7 years, to my knowledge, in the archives of Mount Athos, there are some more original documents of Dimitrios Palaiologos. If I think you must examine also them, perhaps some of them copied from anonymous. Also from anonymous A31.
Yeah.
And with your communication today, you introduce us to this great problem and the new orientation of the research for the identification of the scribes of manuscripts with scribes of documents and the variations, because there is not exactly the same script in a manuscript and the same in a document, or sometimes is or not.
I understand your question. It's also a question I had when I first came to the research, like why would someone who is to this material, why would someone who is predominantly copying classical or classically inspired texts be copying in a diplomatic document? Yes, it's a good question.
It's not only it's not a unique case. We have much more from 14th century. Already, I think the research has started on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dixon.